Welcome to Word of Hope, Ovarian Cancer Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Word and Libby's Hope. For more links and information on this episode, visit wordofhopepodcast.com.
Welcome to Word of Hope, Ovarian Cancer Podcast, Episode 6, Neoadjuvant Chemotherapy. I'm Nate Manahan, Women's Oncology Research and Dialogue, and I am joined with Paul Cacciatore from Libby's Hope. I am so excited that we are now on Episode 6 of this great podcast and all the information we're learning. And today, Paul's going to help us get through the next topic of these 10 topics for these first episodes that we've been going through. So, Paul, as we talk about neoadjuvant chemotherapy, why don't you get us started?
Okay, thanks, Nate. The next topic, again, another study that was reported in the New England Journal of Medicine, a very important study. And it addressed the topic of neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Just a fancy word, adjuvant in medicine means primary treatment. Yeah. Neo would be before. And so in the normal standard of care for ovarian cancer, the normal path for an advanced ovarian cancer patient is to first receive surgery with the hopes of removing all but less than maybe 1 centimeter of ovarian cancer from the woman, followed by some type of a treatment after that, but most likely chemotherapy, maybe combined with IP chemotherapy, intraperitoneal chemotherapy, has been the standard of care for quite a while. What this study looked at is with late stage, and these patients in this study were late stage. They were all stage 3C and 4 patients. So these are, women who are in, these are the later stages of ovarian cancer. And what they did is they said, what if we give them chemotherapy first? And the hope here was to try to make them, I guess the theory is to try to make them better surgical candidates. The theory being, if you can give them chemo on the front end, you can shrink the amount of cancer that they have in these later stages. You may then, with surgery that follows, be able to remove more ovarian cancer than you otherwise would have been able to if you did surgery first. That's the primary concept or the principle.
Now, this seems to be a controversial debate that's been going on for quite some time. Paul, is this study larger than some of the others?
I think they looked at about 670 patients. It was, multiple institutions, 59 institutions participated over about a 5-year period. So this was a pretty serious study. Out of the patients involved, I already noted that they're all late-stage patients. About 60% of these patients, to give you some idea, had metastatic lesions that were larger than 10 centimeters. Yeah. So these were patients that, had extensive ovarian cancer. Now, what they found out is they tried to then compare, these patients placed into the normal standard of care, surgery first, chemo second, to this neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Again, chemotherapy first, surgery second. And what they found out was the overall survival for both study groups was quite similar. They found out, I think it was 29 months in the primary surgery arm, and it was 30 months in the neoadjuvant chemotherapy arm. Progression-free survival was about 12 months in both arms. Very, very similar. And the researchers also noted that in the neoadjuvant arm, the number of lesions that had a known size of 1 centimeter or more were reduced with respect to cancer on the diaphragm, in the liver, and in the intestines.
Paul, this seems like really good news. Are there more benefits cited?
There was less postoperative death in the neoadjuvant chemo arm. There was less hemorrhage, less infection, less vascular complications.
Yeah, overall, it seems like there was a lot of benefit. Were there conclusions to this study?
Nate, what they found out is that, and it was a good way to state the conclusion, the researchers who did the study, they concluded that complete resection of all visible disease was the single most important factor, rather than the timing of when you gave the chemotherapy, and which stresses what we already know in the ovarian cancer area, that surgery is the single best weapon against ovarian cancer, especially surgery performed by a gynecologic oncologist at a high-volume cancer center, as the studies indicate. Well, that all sounded pretty well and good, but there was also a commentary that came out with this study. It was put out by a U.S. doctor actually located here in Southern California, where I'm based. And he said, well, those are interesting results, but there's a couple things that need to be pointed out in this study. The first thing he noted was that in the United States, the optimal debulking rate or the optimal cytoreduction rate meaning, again, surgery where there's less than 1 centimeter of cancer after the surgery is completed, that rate is about 70% in the United States. It was 41% in this study. Okay? Right. In the United States, 2/3 of these optimal surgeries, 2/3 in the United States are complete. There's no visible ovarian cancer left. In this study, it was about 19%. And so I think you can see where I'm going pretty quickly. Right. What he's saying is maybe this study speaks more to the need for better surgery being available for women with ovarian cancer than it does about the timing of chemotherapy.
Paul, what is the takeaway message of this findings, and why is it really important for ovarian cancer research?
Maybe the big takeaway from this study is that, one, surgery is important, and two, it can be a bit alarming, whether it's in the United States or, in the UK or anywhere else in the world, that if you don't achieve a good optimal, cytoreduction or surgery for an ovarian cancer patient, that's problematic. And it really kind of, it's really the fly in the ointment, I think, with respect to this study, because he raises a very, very good point, which is if the quality of the surgery or the availability of the surgery or people doing the surgery, if it didn't rise to the level of what we consider best practices, and I'm not just talking in terms of the United States, I mean throughout the world, it's going to be a hard study to judge. And then what he did is he took a step further, and when he dug into the data, what the doctor found out was that the longest survival gains, when you looked at patients with no residual disease in both arms, that the longest survival gains were in the primary standard of care arm, which was around, I think it was around 44 months. And it was only 38 in the neoadjuvant chemo arm. And so, again, I think this is a situation where having a lot of bright minds look at an issue is very helpful, because this was a much-needed study, this neoadjuvant study. I don't think the standard of care for early-stage ovarian cancer has changed. We have to keep in mind that this study just addressed stage 3C and 4 patients, late stage. And even given the finding of this study, I think you have to take into account this comment that was placed in the commentary by the U.S. doctor, that the study really needs to be looked at in the context of why weren't the surgical debulking rates higher? Why didn't they reach optimal cytoreduction in more instances than they did? And would that have in fact affected the outcome of comparison of neoadjuvant to standard of care? So I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing issue, I think, as well, that needs to get settled. And I think but the researchers, I thought, did a good job. It was good to have a big study that looked at neoadjuvant chemo, because there are some scenarios that you can think of that may be helpful, that maybe this chemotherapy can make an otherwise non-surgical candidate into a surgical candidate. But at the same time, it's important that any woman that goes and has surgery done, that it's done by a gynecologic oncologist at a high volume center, so that you do get best practices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it might be interesting to point out that having met several people that have had neoadjuvant chemotherapy before their first surgery, often, in this case, they weren't looking at this, often it's for other medical issues that are coming on, specifically cardiovascular issues, to get them ready so they can survive the first surgery. And right. that is a different case than what they were looking at in this particular study. These weren't women that were waiting to have their first surgery so they're ready for the first surgery. These are women that they were judging which was the best statement of care. That's right. That's right. And but it maybe raises the bigger issue that maybe we haven't emphasized the true benefit of a very good optimal surgery done by the right person at the right center. I remember reading an article a couple years ago that said, and actually I think it was put out by Johns Hopkins, and they said the two biggest questions are who and where. Yep. Who, meaning a gynecologic oncologist should do the surgery, and where, get to a high volume surgical center with a gynecologic oncologist, people who do this day in and day out and do it routinely because they do so many cases.
And so,
those are absolutely fair questions to ask your doctor. How many cases do you do on a regular basis? And they're questions any doctor should be able to respond and say, this is what we do, this is why we do it. And obviously going to a gynecologic oncologist, and then as a patient, feel empowered to ask the questions of your doctor about their surgical care and what they expect out of their surgical care.
Absolutely, Nate. I think that's absolutely critical.
Paul, thank you so much today for a great description of neoadjuvant chemotherapy and for helping us to understand the importance and the critical decision of getting the right surgery at the right time. Please join us as we continue on our series. We'll be in episode number 7 next time. We're going to be talking about diagnosis of ovarian cancer as well as the new HE4 test. So please come back. And in between that time, before the new episode's launched, go on over to wordofhopepodcast.com. Read some of the articles there posted by Paul and others, and then make sure that you leave comments, send us an email. We would love to hear from you and to see how we can improve this podcast. Thanks for joining us on the Word of Hope podcast, and we will see you next time.
You've been listening to Word of Hope Ovarian Cancer Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Word and Libby's Hope. For more information on this episode and how to subscribe, visit wordofhopepodcast.com.